the schedule released about an hour ago, or in the last hour, for LSU and its 10 SEC games. We'll talk about all of that and more with our friend Glenn Guilbeau, LSU Beat Tweet, joining us now, of course, USA Today. And Glenn, it's always a pleasure. Welcome to the show. Got a lot to talk about, don't we?
Hey, Kenny, how are you? Yeah, it was pretty exciting to get all that scheduled. They put them all in a hat and just started picking. I mean, they changed it drastically from the original dates, but should be fun if we get to see it.
Yeah, well, we're going to get into the schedule in just a moment, but first, your piece that was published earlier today about football this fall clearly being risky, according to the American Heart Association president. Now, we've seen opinions from both sides, and Greg Stewart here at Tulane University, Tulane Medical Center, who's the primary man for the American Athletic Conference, says they absolutely can play, and they absolutely have a path to do so, and it's safe to do so. He's also the lead counsel and the lead medical associate for the LHSAA in high school football here in Louisiana. And yet you have a different take today, talking to someone with the American Heart Association. Talk about your piece, first of all, and secondly, about the diametrically opposed concepts we have right now in the sport.
Well, Dr. Elkin he's not connected with any conference or anything, so I think he may be able to speak more objectively and just about medicine, which is who the Pac-12 and Big Ten, they spoke to medical people who generally I think are more objective than most people. I mean, they're doctors. They're looking at things clinically, and when a doctor works on somebody, they don't check how much what political party they belong to or whatever. They go in and they have surgery or whatever like that. So in general, I think doctors tend to be more objective in most cases, and in this case, I mean, I think most of the doctors you talk to or I've read, talk about the risks involved, and what's key in recent weeks and what got the conferences to cancel is this relatively newfound information and concern of potential heart risks that wasn't around more than 3 weeks ago. At least it wasn't public. So that's a lot what Dr. Elkin talked to me about. He didn't come out and say you shouldn't play football or you should, but he just said if you do, it's going to be very risky. And he talked a little bit about testing in there too, because ultimately, in a perfect world, if you can test perfectly and keep all the players with the virus out of practice and out of the games, then you should be okay. But that's going to be really, really difficult, and it might be impossible too. It's to get the test back in time all the time. But it's definitely looking more and more complicated and difficult to see all these seasons. They may start, but I can't see them all lasting very long.
Glenn Guilbeau with us, talking about the schedule of the SEC in a moment, but whether or not they can actually play. And I think it's obviously quite different from the professional to the amateur level. We see all the blowback from the Big Ten players who all want to play, and these schools are speaking out in vociferous fashion. Justin Fields started the movement, but everybody now chiming in from most of the significant schools in that league, with the possible exception of Northwestern. That said, it's the amateur level, therefore the argument, well, let them make the decisions for themselves. Does that hold water? It's a little bit different on the professional level where they're adults and they get paid, right?
Yeah, and they get paid, and they can also opt out and still get paid somewhat and come back next season. And you can do that a little bit at the college level too. You can get a waiver and come back if you opt out. But the NFL players are in a little different situation because they can opt out, and they also they have millionaire and billionaire owners, and the way the NFL has so much money. I mean, they can afford probably more testing than any single entity out there. So they may be more prepared to do the amount of testing you really need to have somewhat of a season. Whereas in college football, there's so many teams and it's so splintered financial wise. Some conferences can afford a lot of it, others can't. And really that's why a lot of conferences and teams opted out, because of the cost of the testing, and they lose money in football anyway. But I think I think there might be a better chance to see an NFL season. But if you look at the heart impact, those guys are older and bigger and have more heart risks.
Well, we've already seen 2 LSU players opt out, both of them starters, Neil Farrell and, of course, Kerry Vincent, making that announcement today that he's not going to participate. Right. So we've seen that on the college level already.
Yeah, and Neil Farrell's some members of his family got COVID, and that was the reason he opted out. He's from Mobile, and now Kerry. I mean, it's obviously pandemic involved, but he just opted out of his senior season to get ready for the draft now, which that would not happen in a normal year, because Kerry's probably a 3rd round pick at best, maybe 2nd round. So he's got some multiple reasons going there, but it makes sense. And I think a lot of guys who are seniors right now or who are juniors and think they can get drafted, I thought more of those guys would have opted out by now, just not to have to deal with this. Even if you go through the season, it's a lot. I can just see why guys would want to just skip this and get ready for the draft. There's plenty of reasons to do that, so I understand both decisions.
Glenn Guilbeau with us at 260-1061 if you'd like to join us. And, of course, the SEC releasing its schedule, primetime, just finished it up, and you could study it. We have the whole thing posted at CrescentCitySports.com. But, from LSU's perspective, I think it sets up about as well as it can, given the circumstances. It starts off realistically, and I don't want to be too disrespectful to the opponents, but it starts off almost like, not quite, but almost like playing some non-conference opponents, because they've got 3 of the lesser lights, if you will, to start the season: Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, and Missouri. 3 games that, frankly, they should win, and frankly, they're likely going to win before they get into a very difficult, 5-week stretch against 3 top 10 teams at Florida, at Auburn, and, of course, Alabama at home. And then, of course, the last half of the schedule, then they get a game at Arkansas, even on the road, barring anything unusual, should be a layup. Then a big game at A&M before closing out at Ole Miss. When you had a chance to first glance at the schedule, did you feel like it set up pretty well overall?
Well, I knew it was going to be. They had a good chance of being able to be set up well because of the 2 new teams that were added from the East, which were Vanderbilt and Missouri. So that's 2 of the worst teams in the SEC, and LSU's already got Arkansas. But you're right. Everybody talks about how tough the SEC is, but every year, like most conferences, the SEC's got 3, maybe 4 teams that are really runaways. Like some of the non-conference teams they play. I mean, my goodness, Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, and Missouri to start the season. That really is like an exhibition season before they go to Florida. And then they have South Carolina, which is kind of average, on October 24th. Then they have a tough game at Auburn. Then they're open. Then Alabama. Then they got a nice break. So they get a break before Alabama, break after Alabama, because they go to Arkansas. And then they go to A&M Thanksgiving week, which would probably be a tough game. And then Ole Miss in the season finale at home. That was originally, or the original schedule, they were playing them on September 26th. But Ole Miss is not a strong team either. So I think LSU has one of the easiest list of opponents, and they have one of the most well laid out schedule too. Whereas Alabama's got A&M and Georgia in 2 of the first 4 weeks. But they got a pretty tough schedule too, and they have the open week before LSU as usual.
The reality of the situation is 9-1 will absolutely get them in the SEC championship game, and it will get them in the playoff if they can win the SEC title in Atlanta. They can lose to Florida and still be just fine, right?
Oh yeah, and this year with just as it is now with just the 3 Power 5 conferences in the league, it's going to be easier for some SEC teams, I think, to get in with 1, maybe 2 losses. You could have 3 SEC teams in the 4 playoffs, just because there's less teams to choose from with the Big 12 and Pac-12 out of it. But yeah, I would definitely think with 1 loss, you can get in the playoffs as an SEC team, and you'll have a chance with 2, depending on who they are and when.
Yeah, I would think that there would be 2 SEC teams in the playoff, a virtual guarantee with the lesser participants in it. But I also think it opens the path for the others, the gang of 5, if you will, after the Power 5 conferences to get a chance. The Group of 5 conferences really have a shot now, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, that would be cool if it would take a pandemic to do it, but if the team from say Conference USA or one of the non-Power 5 got in, that would be cool.
Yeah, well, the fact of the matter is that the American Athletic Conference was 4th in the country last year, ahead of the ACC.
Right.
It was a better league. So, and that's a league Tulane's in, but it's a good league. They got really fine teams in that league, and this would be the year that somebody might have a shot where that's concerned. Visiting with Glenn Guilbeau, and Glenn, just to talk a little bit about this LSU team on the practice field today. We talked about Vincent and Farrell. I think they can mitigate those losses with the people they have, for sure. So the question marks on this team, in your mind, a lot of people are going to talk about Miles Brennan. Some people are going to talk about the offensive line. What do you see as the biggest question mark surrounding the 2020 LSU Tigers if they hit the field?
Well, I'll tell you, if you had to pick where you lost 2 players, the secondary and the defensive line probably might be your first 2 picks, because they're really deep and fast and talented in both areas. Kerry Vincent's a heck of a player, as is Neil Farrell, but I think they're going to be able to replace those guys with some young players coming up, and they're kind of moving people around because Bo Pelini's new defensive coordinator. I like every part of this team except quarterback, and mainly that's an unknown. But the offensive line to me looks very strong. The running backs are deep. The wide receivers are still very good with Chase and Terrace Marshall. They're good at tight end with Eric Gilbert, and they have some depth there finally. But Miles Brennan hasn't played in a game that mattered since 2017, and he didn't play well in that game against Troy. But he's gotten stronger. He's been exposed to some great coaching with Steve Ensminger and Joe Brady last year, even though he's gone, and he'll be surrounded by Jamar Chase can make a quarterback look good, so he's surrounded by a lot of good players, so he could play well enough to win, but he's still a question mark, and I think Bo Pelini is a question mark too. Ed Orgeron definitely has a knack for hiring coaches, and he wanted Bo Pelini, but that's great, but Bo hasn't been a defensive coordinator since 2007. When he was at LSU, and frankly, his defenses at his head coaching stops at Nebraska and Youngstown, he had some good defenses, he had some average defenses, and he had some very bad defenses, particularly at Nebraska. So it's going to be interesting to see how he adjusts to coming back to the SEC.
Yeah, Pelini and of course Brady would be the biggest questions, because Brady, you're bringing in a veteran NFL guy there as well, and I guess we're going to find out just how good Brady really was from the offensive perspective, and how much of it was on him.
Well, I think a lot of offensive coordinators would have been good with Joe Burrow. I think we might see how good Brady was because of Burrow. We might learn that too.
No question about it. Listen, they were the sum of their parts last year. Burrow was phenomenal, but they had so many good players. And they had a great scheme. It was everything, really.
He did have a great scheme, and I think Joe Brady was just the missing link there. And and since he left, people, the LSU propaganda machine, if you will, they've tried to diminish some of what he did and say, oh, he just did some of these tight end plays or whatever. No, he did a lot. I mean, he really revolutionized the offense, and I think Steve Ensminger did very well too. And he's a good play caller, and as he learned the offense from Brady, he got really good at calling plays too. Because Ensminger still called a lot of the plays. Joe Burrow used to tell us who called which play during the season, and Ensminger called a lot of the touchdown passes, surprising ones, like on 3rd and short or something like that. And I think Ensminger's going to be that much better having worked with Brady.
Yeah, I think you're accurate about that too. I think there's going to be a lot to like there from the fact that they have that experience, and obviously this is a situation where it carries over. So interesting to see, and we'll find out soon enough. Now, LSU gets a commitment for the class of 2022 from offensive lineman Lucas Taylor of Mobile, Alabama. He had offers from Auburn, Florida, Florida State, Penn State, Texas A&M, among others. So this is a pretty significant get for LSU to get a really good player out of Alabama.
Well, Coach Orgeron was a great recruiter on arrival at LSU, and he's been consistent, and now he has more to recruit too than he's ever had at LSU, and kind of like when he was recruiting at USC and Miami for a spell there throughout his career. But he can recruit to the greatest college football season ever, or one of the greatest ever, and one of the greatest quarterbacks ever, and you're going to start seeing some very good quarterbacks coming in the next couple of years with Jamie Walker Howard and the former Saint quarterback's son coming in.
Garrett Nussmeier. Yep.
Yes. So he's definitely upgraded that position, and that was one of the that's one of the major things he needed to do to improve on his predecessor. Number one was completely change the offense, which he did with Joe Brady and Joe Burrow, and the next thing is to recruit some very good high school quarterbacks. LSU hasn't had a great high school quarterback play for them well since Mettenberger was a transfer too, since Matt Flynn and Jamarcus Russell. Every good quarterback since then has been a transfer. So that's fixing to change too.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's definitely been the biggest upgrade of this program. When you look at the conference, and again, assuming they're going to play and that they get through things, which I still think is possible, but who knows what's going to happen. Everybody likes Alabama in the West. I think LSU is a close second. I really think they're still there and still have a shot at this. A&M is clearly better. Auburn's still good. In the East, everybody's on Georgia, and yet I like Florida. I mean, I understand the Georgia love, but they've got to prove it, right? I mean, I'm looking at the way these teams played last year, the way they finished as well. Florida looked awfully good to me at the end of the year. They played LSU tough as well.
Oh, I think Florida's clearly the best team in the East. I think Georgia, their offensive philosophy of Kirby Smart has caught up with them last year, and I think it's going to continue to get them in trouble. He's kind of still in the early 2000s, really, and I don't believe in Texas A&M quite yet either. They haven't proven anything. And to me, LSU and Alabama are the two teams in the West, and really each of them are in very similar situations. They lost great quarterbacks, and they have quarterbacks who might be okay. Matt Jones has played more, but neither Matt Jones or Miles Brennan, scare you like previous like Tagovailoa and Burrow. And I think the only other threat there is Auburn in the West and Florida in the East.
About a minute or two left with Glenn Guilbeau, and just a note or two on other sports. Basketball, Will Wade just keeps signing really good players. We haven't seen the other shoe drop at all. They get all three guys back from the draft. they keep signing players. They figure to be awfully good, and yet all's quiet on the Western Front. We haven't heard anything pertaining to what everybody thought might happen with the NCAA.
Yeah, and I was told that it would have happened by now, but I think maybe COVID had something to do with that. But I don't know why. It seems like they would have more time to investigate. But the NCAA is very weak. We've seen that in recent weeks and months with COVID. All the conferences are just kind of ruling themselves. But it'd be nice to see LSU play in an SEC tournament. Or see Will Wade in an SEC tournament. He missed the last two. This past one and with the COVID and the one before when he got suspended. But he's I think this coming team is going to be closer to his team from the 18-19 season than last season. I think this team could make some noise in the NCAA tournament.
And then finally, baseball. Paul Mainieri spoke last Friday. They've got, first of all, I thought they had really good pitching before the season shut down last year. The question would have been their hitting, but based on everything they've got coming back, they ought to be really good. Problem is their league is so good.
Yeah, the league. Every other team's got a lot of people coming back too because of the extra year. But they only played I think 17 games last year, but they had their best team ERA in decades. And it's kind of a freaky stat because of the short season, but that was clearly their strength and was going to keep them in anything if they'd had last season. They didn't look strong on offense though, but I really like their pitching and their left-handed pitching. He's got 3 legitimate left-handed pitchers, and in recent years he didn't have any. I think he's if they stay healthy, he could have a real strong rotation, and he could have weekend starters pitching during the midweek, and if he could just have some decent offense, they should be really good in 2021.
Right there with you. You can follow him on Twitter at LSU Beat Tweet. Read his work in USA Today. And Glenn Guilbeau, thank you so much. We appreciate the time. Keep up the fine work, and hopefully we're talking about a game here sometime in the very near future, right?
Yes. Everybody's been looking at these schedules. I think people would be excited to see LSU play Liberty at 7 a.m. on September 26th, or anybody. But it should be fun if we can get there.
All good. Glenn, thank you. Appreciate the time.
Okay.